Thank you all for being here today. We respectfully acknowledge that we are located on the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe Nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations, which include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog Island, Busseley, and Georgina Island First Nations. We respectfully acknowledge that the Williams Treaties First Nations are the stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain their responsibility to ensure their health and the integrity for generations to come. My name is Muhannad Al-Ghul, of Palestinian origin. I'm an immigrant and a settler in this land. My grandparents were displaced from the land they called Palestine a long time ago, and I am grateful for what this land has offered me throughout the years. And even though I've been here for some time, I have a lot to learn about the history, especially when it comes to the struggles of their indigenous communities in the face of colonization. We are all treaty people. How many people here have been following what's going on in Palestine and Israel for the last 6 months? How many have been following before? Quite a few. When I told my mother I'm taking the day off work because I'm helping organize this event, she gave a big shriek and said, "Be careful, son." And this is part of the reality of being from a marginalized community. And it's unfortunate, it doesn't need to be. But the truth is, Palestinian and Jewish communities on the ground have been working together for social justice for a long time. And this doesn't get the spotlight that it deserves. Trauma has been used by very large and powerful corporate interests for a long time to keep these voices down. And I hope this space can be a safe space for us to talk about this topic. Dr. Jeff Wilkinson and Raja Khouri wrote this book on October 4th, a few days before October 7th, in an effort to bring light to the collective trauma. I hope you listen with a curious ear, and thank you all for being here.
Hi everyone and welcome. Before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge the hard work that has been put in by our Dean Peter Stewart and Karen Douglas. I don't see Karen here. She's gone. She was here till about 10 seconds ago. This has been in the works for months now, and I would like to, if you can, take 1 second to give a little applause for Peter and Karen. And it goes with us saying that we appreciate both Jeff and Raja being here today, and we appreciate them sharing their thoughts with us. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping measures that I thought we can talk about, and then we can go from there. Number one is I'm not a big fan of censoring people, so I'm willing to give a lot of leeway when asking questions. I understand it's a very emotional moment for all of us. But please keep your questions to minimum, or the length of your questions to the minimum, I guess, so that there is space for everyone to participate. And please be respectful of all the views that are here. It's very important for us to have an open and candid conversation in a safe space. So please be cautious of that. Number two, in my questions, you might notice that I won't ask a distinction between Jewish and Muslim community, or more or less I'll focus on the distinction between Palestinian and Israeli communities, because there are a good number of Arab Jews, and there are a good number of people who live on both sides of the border who do not have a profession of faith. And I think it's important to recognize that these people are also part of the, impacted by the situation, and not to mention the substantial Christian population who calls those lands home. And lastly, we recognize that this is a very complex issue. We definitely, I don't think the point is to say the answers that are given here are the only answers to the problem, but maybe this is a good place to start a conversation that can carry on beyond this classroom. I have a little favorite poem of mine that I thought might be a good way to start this off, and it's at least reflective of the way I think about things. I thought I'll share it, maybe it is for yours too. The poem was written in 1700, so excuse the gender-based language that exists in it, but here we are. Who casts not up his eye for the sun when it rises, but who takes off his eye from a comet when that breaks out? Who bends not his ear to any bell which upon any occasion rings, but who can remove it from the bell which is passing a piece of himself out of this world? No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a cloth be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a manner of thy friends or thy own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I'm involved in mankind, and therefore never sent to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And with that, I would like to start with my first question for both Raja and Jeff. First of all, I read the book, and it was a very interesting book. It was a very interesting approach to the problem. And as a sociologist who is interested in identities, it was definitely a type of book that spoke to me. It felt like it was written specifically for me. I kind of want to start off by asking, how did you guys come together? How did you guys decide you're going to write this book?
Did you want me to start, Raja? Can you, you able to hear me?
I can't.
You able to hear me? I can't tell.
I can't, Jeff.
I don't think my mic. I don't think my mic is working.
It's working now. It's working now. I can hear you. And Amir's voice is muffled for some reason.
Can you hear us now?
Say again.
Can you hear us now?
Jeff, speak.
Excuse me. Hi.
Yes,
You
yes.
can hear me. Okay, we're good.
I can hear you.
Okay. So should I, excuse me, Raja. So just be able to clear with everyone. My dear friend Raja, a colleague and co-writer, came down with the flu, and I came to his house to pick him up today, and it just wasn't a good idea for him to come. So we're just so grateful that we can still do our tag team thing together. So Raja, why don't you start about how how this happened?
I'm sorry I couldn't be with you folks. It's a nasty bug, and my energy level is very low. And if you see me sweating, it's not because you're asking difficult questions. It's because of the meds that I'm taking. Good to be with everyone, regardless. My journey started 17 years ago when I decided to start talking to Zionists. And as a Palestinian, that was always something that you do not really consider, because Zionists in the Palestinian narrative are the folks who caused Palestinian dispossession, destruction of Palestinian society in 1948, and they were the enemy. And but I decided to do that first out of curiosity, but also out of wanting to know what I didn't know about them, and what I didn't know about Zionism. Was it the one-dimensional thing that I thought it was, that destructive force, or was there more to it? And it was the first time that I ever heard someone describe Zionism as a movement for, self-determination for the Jewish people. So I was in my late 40s at the time, and that was the first time I heard that expression. And that led me to, question what else didn't I know or I needed to know about the other narrative. What was I missing from that picture? And the main reason why I wanted to do that is because I was really distressed at the state of affairs between these two Canadian communities, living side by side, not knowing each other, not wanting to know each other, having all kinds of stereotypical images of each other, distrustful of each other, and at times even hateful. And as someone whose background is in human rights and inclusion, something chafed at me about wanting to do something, see if I can actually do something about this. And that's how my journey started. And when I met this lovely gentleman here, and he will tell you more about that particular experience, we found this common interest in breaking taboos, a common interest in trying to create some understanding between the two communities and pushing back against the disinformation, the hateful rhetoric out there that is meant to divide people and keep them ensconced in their tribes and away from the other. So that's in short how I got into this.
Okay, I guess that's my turn. Super glad to be with you all tonight. It was a little awkward getting us together like this, but we're really, really glad to be here. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about how I got to this, but to first say that my core background is in human rights and justice. So where we're locating tonight, almost 6 months after October 7th, almost 6 months of bombing, starvation, pain, that is, I want to be careful about. You will hear us talk about different experiences, but that doesn't mean we use neutral language. So the bombing is being done by the Israeli military, as the Hamas attacks were done by a militant group. There is blame to place. And I don't want anyone here to think of us, because we bridge gaps, that we're neutral in our approach. I sit here tonight with Raja in pain at watching and seeing every day on TV the suffering in Gaza. Not what I will label not as a war in Gaza, but a war on Gaza. That doesn't make me less concerned about trauma in general, Palestinian trauma, Jewish trauma, other traumas. But it does position me clearly in justice and right. And what is happening every day now, no matter the military objective, is wrong. Is objectively wrong. And that sometimes is offensive to my community. But we do this work because of our shared values, and that is a core value of mine. What is just? Does every human being, regardless, have the right to live with dignity and freedom, and to live in the land that they call home with equal rights? Those are my core values. And so no matter what else I talk about tonight, don't forget those are our core values. So the really, really long super story that I'm going to tell it about this long is I had done a lot of equity work. I went to graduate school in my 50s. I went to OISE in downtown Toronto to do a doctorate and was really not sure what I was going to research, but I knew I had done a lot of work on my family history in the Holocaust. I'd written music about it. I'm a musician first. And I had known my story really well. But I realized I didn't know the other story well at all. And I became invested in knowing. So I decided to bring a group of Jews and Palestinians from Toronto together and have them listen to each other's stories, and reflect on each other's traumas. And this dear man was one of my victims. And when, all the academic stuff was over and the dissertation was defended, I went back to him and I said, we need to do something together. There's something magic about how we speak to each other, how we listen to each other. From the first moment, literally, of our first interview together, he literally just opened up, Raja just opened up, his family story and had this amazing capacity to be totally honest and at the same time respectful and open that there was another story that he didn't fully understand. And I have never seen that perfect mix before or since. Why don't we hop on
sure.
from there?
Well, this brings me to, and this is, I'm not getting paid here to plug the book or anything, but in the book you guys talk about generational trauma. And what occurred to me as someone who's kind of getting close to 40 is that this notion of generational trauma might be lost to the newer generation who haven't read the book. So I know I'm asking you guys to summarize what is essentially volumes of books here, but can you summarize the last 80 years and talk about kind of what is it in 30 seconds flat?
So all the people are laughing, understand that you could fill your library just with books on the history of the Israel-Palestine struggle. So are we going to...
So instead of talking about kind of like the detailed history,
Right.
maybe we can talk about kind of the traumatic moments
Okay.
that you would identify as sort of turning points.
Okay, perfect. I'm gonna have the audience help me. I'm gonna say a date. Somebody tell me what its significance was. Okay, 1917. That's a little before. That's 1894, but good guess. The Balfour Declaration. How many people, show of hands, know what the Balfour Declaration is? That means everyone else doesn't, right? Okay, so Lord Balfour was an English statesman, and even before Britain actually had control of the land after World War I, he wrote this little letter that said, it is Great Britain's intention to form a Jewish state in the land. There was the vast majority of the population were Arab Palestinians, and you can imagine that this seemed like a deep threat, and it was. Raja, do you want to throw out a date or something that you can that we can ask these folks about?
Oh, 1936.
1936. That's a graduate level question. Okay, do you want to tell us what yeah, right there. That's before, but you're on the right track. It's a different commission, the Peel Commission. Excuse me, what Mostaghim was referring to just before the Balfour Declaration, as has happened throughout history. Two main countries, Great Britain and France, with a little help from Russia, pulled out of their pockets the proverbial magic marker, and divided up territory and land that didn't belong to them. But 1936.
And another significant thing that happened in 1936 was the start of what was called the Arab-Palestinian Rebellion that lasted for 3 years. And the rebellion was opposed to two things: British rule and the continued migration of Jews from Europe at the time. because of the Zionist project and the Balfour Declaration, if people realize that these numbers of people coming in, it's not sort of regular migratory flow. It was intentional and with the purpose of basically taking land away from Palestinians and giving it to European Jews. Now, bear in mind that at the time, the image of Europeans in the region was not exactly a nice one. It was a very colonialist image, and to Arab Palestinians, it looked like the British colonizers were trying to bring in other Europeans, namely Jewish Europeans, to replace them as they leave the land. So basically, one colonial power to be replaced, with another.
Right. And the Peel Commission was formed because of the Arab Revolt, when this particular British statesman felt that it was beginning to become clear that the two groups were not going to live peacefully together. So he made the first attempt at partition. It failed. 1947. Here's some. You're close. Just before the Nakba that created the Nakba, it's actually something done by the United Nations. Could you say it nice and loud? So that was 1948. So 1940, but you're really close, really close. So in 1947, the UN created a partition plan that we could talk about all night, but we won't. The short version is that the Arabs were barely consulted, and the ones that were said no thank you, that it gave a great deal more land to the Jews than the population would have warranted, and it also was discontiguous. So the Arab populations were all broken up. That led to war. That led to two things: the establishment of the State of Israel and the Nakba, which is the Arab word for catastrophe, where 750,000 Arab Palestinians were removed, or some, because of fear actually left, but most were forcibly removed. And the important part is they were never allowed to return. And the pain, the trauma for Palestinians, as Holocaust is for the Jews, is the Nakba of 1948. So we'll talk about a lot of other pains, but this is the big wound.
And what that means is that when a Palestinian or a Jew sees something happening, an event happening, they hear a word, the reaction that they have most often and unknowingly goes all the way back to that source of the trauma. And to Palestinians, for instance, the Nakba never ended, because since 1947-48, the theft of land continued, the dispossession continued, the oppression continued, and every time another piece of land is taken to build Jewish settlements on it, it brings back the Nakba, because it's a continuation, of that trauma.
It's very important. Maybe we can, lead into the next part, which I think is about trauma.
Because I guess my big question was, as I was reading the book, as I was halfway through the book, the question that was going through my head was, you guys did a really good job of staying away from what one could call misery Olympic. Kind of this notion that my trauma is worse than yours, and the other side saying, well, no, my trauma is worse than yours, it's more recent, no, mine is more recent. How did you guys manage to avoid that misery Olympic?
Well, we are still at the
Working through
moment
it.
diving around it. So I think what what I want to say is what we just talked about with the Holocaust and the Nakba. We call them meta narratives. So it's this overarching story that impacts everything. We all have meta narratives. If any of you have been married for a long time, you have meta narratives in your relationship. Those fallback positions that always come up. So you think you're talking about socks, and you're actually talking about something very different. So on a serious note, to be able to understand a little bit of what's actually been happening in the last 5-6 months, for most of my community, October 7th was a ripple effect of the Holocaust. This is not necessarily logic or numbers. It was the impact of the promise of Israel is safety. And that promise was shattered on October 7th. And Jews around the world are still trying to deal with what that means for them. When you have seen pictures of Palestinians being pushed from northern Gaza to southern Gaza, this is the Nakba again. This is exactly what happened in 48. They were pushed out, and they were not allowed to come back. So these experiences of trauma are running our stories. And to be, from a trauma perspective, from a sociological, perspective, the event is not what causes us problems. It's the story we tell about the event that causes us difficulty. And that story becomes overwhelming because it's set within a collective. So it's not a Jew telling a story, it's my community telling a story. It's not a Palestinian telling a story, it's the Palestinian community telling a story. And that gravitates it, into this moment that is almost irresistible and impenetrable to other information because it is siloed within an identity experience. And these are very powerful experiences. So you'll hear us say a lot tonight about empathy. There are people here, I'm sure, who are very angry for different reasons about what is occurring. Feel that, be with it, protest, do whatever you need to do, use your voice. That doesn't mean you can't have sympathy and empathy for someone who feels differently or is having a different experience. Probably having the same pain, but for a different reason.
I liked your the term Misery Olympics, Amir. You got a thumbs up on that one. And it actually fits very nicely in this current context because there is a competition of victimhood, and victimhood plays a very, very large part in the Israeli-Palestinian or Jewish-Palestinian narrative. What makes it particularly interesting is that the Palestinians see themselves as victims of Zionism and Zionists. But Jews, of course, were not victimized historically by Palestinians. They were victimized by Europeans, European nations for centuries of anti-Semitism, followed by pogroms, followed by the Holocaust. So when it gets to, this victimhood, the Palestinians often say to Jews, how could you do this to us after having gone through your experience with oppression and victimization? And a Jew's response is, are you comparing your Nakba to my Holocaust? Are you comparing your trauma to mine? So, and then again, when you talk about trauma specifically, we whenever we talk about the two meta narratives, the Nakba and the Holocaust, we specifically say that we are not comparing the two events, but we are looking at the traumas emanating from these two events. And I remember one Jewish colleague in dialogue, her first reaction was, but it can't be the same kind of trauma because that event is bigger than. So, maybe I'll leave it to Jeff to try and explain to us I called my friend here Dr. Trauma. And, the reason why one needs to be the bigger victim.
Yeah, I mean, at its essence, if we can just kind of bring it back to ourselves. The word trauma often feels like this gigantic sort of force. It is an experience of an event or something that occurs in your life without your permission. It is an interruption in your expectation of normalcy. Now, we have, of course, big trauma. We could say the Holocaust and the Nakba are big traumas. Childhood experiences are often big traumas. But the thing that really sets us apart are often what we might call, in psychology, small t traumas. Those constant nagging occurrences where we don't feel honored or respected, where we feel we are losing something to somebody else, where we have a loss of control. So if you can imagine this sort of experience layered over Jews, over a 3,000-year history, you can imagine how that repetition becomes this sort of tape recording in our heads, and very difficult to come to the other side of it. A sadness that both Raj and I really feel is that we find that a lot of people we work with have been told that they have a choice. You're either with the terrorist or with the genociders. I mean, what a terrible choice, right? We certainly had many students tell us that if they show empathy for someone outside of their tribe, they have someone in their tribe saying, how could you do that? I really want all of you to push back on this loyalty test, on this purity test. You will make mistakes. You will say things that some will take offense at, and perhaps properly. Your duty is to openly listen to how they experience it. We say to students all the time, you can say whatever you want, but it's not a blank check. You are responsible for your words. You're responsible for how they land. And if somebody says, I don't like what you said, you have a duty to say, tell me about that. How did that hurt you? And we are not doing a whole lot of that.
And this brings me in a very roundabout way, I guess, to I kind of want to extend our view a bit, the lens here from this micro focus to a bit of a macro focus. I remember when I was just a young lad, I attended a meeting in which Abba Eban, and for my money, one of the best sort of politician that the state of Israel has ever produced. He was talking about the distinction between, he was talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And he was actually the first person who lended my first copy of Edward Said's Question of Palestine. And he said something, and for those of you who are a bit younger than me, he was the foreign minister of Israel and the ambassador of Israel to the United Nations. So this is the authority by which he's talking about. He said, the situation seems very simple. You have two people of about the same size laying claim to the same land, and the solution seems to be to just divide the land in half and give each group half their share. But he went on from there saying, it is not happening because of the hands of the mullahs and the rabbis and the priests and the religious kind of aspect that creates this tribalism that you guys talk about. I mean, I've noticed that, for example, in the book and in the discussions, it's usually referred to as one's tribe, but in reality, we're talking about one's religion most of the time. And these sort of tribal lines were drawn by imperialist powers, as we talked about at the beginning of the chat. How can we understand this in the context of today's more secular, or at least the more desire for a secular? Or how can we understand ethnocentric state within this larger kind of push towards secularism in the West? And how can we understand sort of the imperial, the empiricism that has brought in the problem that now, it's not that the British are dealing with it or the Russians are dealing with it or the French are dealing with it, it's people who are living in this land dealing with decisions that was made before their grandparents were born. How can we understand this, and how can we try to at least move forward?
I'll give you the tough one, Raj.
What else is new? You know what's funny? I can't see the room. I don't know if I'm talking to 3 people or 300 people.
It's a full room, Raja.
Okay, how much is the room?
Mostly students, which is awesome.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, colonialism, racism, imperialism, all have a lot to do with the Israel-Palestine struggle. In the Zionists, early Zionists, talked openly about colonizing the land. It wasn't a dirty word back then. We're talking about late 1800s, early 1900s, where most of the European powers were colonizers. It was good for business, and if you were smart, you would colonize someone. So the notion of moving people into someone else's land and colonizing it was fairly acceptable. And it was also a racist notion, not unlike in North America when the first explorers came here from Europe, and they went back to Europe and said, the land is empty. They actually said the land is empty. And the early Zionists described Palestine as a land without a people for a people without a land. So when you actually cannot see the people who are already in the land, because why can't you see them? Because they're not people, they're not equal humans. It's the way Europeans viewed the natives, the indigenous people of the lands here, and it's the way that the early Zionists viewed Palestine. And so all of these things, played into it. And then, of course, as times changed, and the idea of, colonialism began to, lose, the cachet that it had, and it started becoming more of a dirty word. The narrative changed, and the narrative had to change, and it was about, okay, well, we just wanted a piece of the land. If the Arabs had accepted the partition plan, everybody would have lived in peace. Palestinians would have had their own land. And people say these things as if they know them. Like, no one knows if the partition plan was accepted, what would happen. I have no idea where I am right now, but
You're doing fine. You're doing fine. Well, you asked a question about religion, so I just want to make sure that your audience understands that primarily at its roots, this is not a religious conflict.
Yeah.
There are Muslims. Majority of Palestinians are Muslims. Many Palestinians are Christian. Certainly, the vast majority of Israelis are Jews. But the conflict is over land, over space, over rights, over 2 national projects that collided in the same space at the same time. So it is a mistake to paint it as a primarily religious conflict, because it's not. I just think that's really important to state. Go ahead.
Yeah, and identity. I mean, let's not forget that Jews were looking for self-determination after centuries of anti-Semitism in Europe, And they were looking for not just a place to live in, to be safe, but also to establish their own identity as a people. And that's what Zionism gave Jews. The problem is that what it gave Jews, it took away from Palestinians. So Palestinians started losing their identity. They became refugees in lands that didn't always welcome them. They had to, start a new life without their belongings, without anything. And to this day, the Palestinian national movement is still trying to, establish a structural identity for the, Palestinian people.
Yeah, just think it's really important, because we're new to you, right? It was the Palestinian who explained to you the importance of Israel to Jews. And I often explain the importance of the land and the suffering of Palestinians. So you do not have to speak solely from a belonging perspective. We learn, we listen to each other, we own these stories together. And I hope that is a model, that others will take up.
I want to talk about that model because I think
Okay.
that's very important, especially in a university environment. I have a few questions here that I was meaning to sort of ask should the temperature of the room be different, but to me it seems like everybody's on board just from the head nodding that I see. Whenever you guys say we should live in peace and we should kind of figure out a way to move forward here, I see a lot
Did
of...
I say that?
You said something about we should
think
learn
we-
to
I think we
understand
should-
each other, empathize.
I think we should live in justice.
Live in justice
Not in
with each
peace.
other. So I'm not going to sort of try to ask those questions, but I do want to know, how do you see, because we have this problem in Canada too, and we have it in the United States, that we have, as we sort of saw at the very beginning here, we did a land acknowledgement in which we acknowledged that we have taken over other people's land. How can we develop that psychology in ourselves? How can we develop that moment in ourselves? That we learn to move beyond sort of these tribal differences that have been set up as extremely important, as crucial to our survival. Now we're saying, wait, maybe they're not as crucial as we thought they were. How did you two personally manage to go beyond those tribal differences? And how do you see, what are some ways that you see kind of people sitting in this room being able to go beyond the trauma and beyond the tribal differences?
It's the thing that keeps Jeff and I so in tune with each other and so firmly, grounded is that, we believe in certain values, justice being one of them, and we speak what we see as the truth in applying these values, regardless of which tribe it is. So when my tribe is, saying something that, is anti-Semitic out of, being frustrated with what's happening, and they start, making generalizations about Jews, I would stand up to them and say, no, do not take this worthy cause of the Palestinians and plunge it into issues of race and racism. It's not about tribe. It's about what's right. And as Jeff often says, it's not who's right, but what's right.
But I guess, Raja, what I'm trying to ask is, how did you get to that point? Because that's not something that is intuitive to us, at least the way that we have been raised. Oftentimes, our identity is closely associated with whatever tribe we belong to, whether it's amongst ethnic lines, religious lines, nationality lines. The notion that our identity is closely connected to tribal identity is drilled into our head from childhood. How did you get to a point, how did you manage to overcome that?
Well, I'll start, and you can.
Okay, sure.
Or do you already know what you want to say? Go ahead if you already got it.
Well, I was just going to say that it's. I'm not functioning at 100%. Please bear with me. If I said to you I'm 100% free of my tribal influences or belongings, I would be lying. But I do keep them contained, among other things. And to me, when you look at, if you believe in human rights being universal, that humanity is more than important than any tribe. If you believe in larger values and larger issues than tribes, you can do it.
I'm going to answer it with a poem that we use in our book. It's super short. It's by someone named Edward Markham, and it goes like this. I hope I can remember it. It's the first word I'm having trouble with. Can you help me out, Raja? Yeah, got it. He drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic rebel he did flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle larger and took him in. So my tribe is what I define it as. Zionism is about 125 years old. This year, I think, is 5,881. So Judaism is a heck of a lot older than Zionism. My Jewish values, my study of Torah, of Talmud, of prayer, of our values of teshuvah, of tzedakah, of charity, of tikkun olam, to heal the world. That's what led me to work with Raja. Because, like there's an old story some of you might know about Moses. You heard this, right? Moses was brought by God to bring the Jewish people out of Egypt. And all these, absolutely unbelievable pharisaical things happened to be able to actually have this happen. So we have a holiday every year. It's called Passover, or in Hebrew, Pesach. And we sit around the table and we tell this story. The essence of the story is, because we were slaves and now are free, our one duty in the world is to spread freedom everywhere. That's what it means for me to be Jewish. So my Jewish tribe is a tribe of values, is a tribe of love, is a tribe of caring, is a tribe of giving to those who have less. So I focus on that part of my tribe, not on a piece of land 6,000 miles away that many think we have to have. So you are not imprisoned to how people around you think. That's why you have this wonderful thing called a mind. You get to select from the smorgasbord of what's around you what your values are, what you care about, what you think is right. So do we ever get our tribal, notions triggered? Absolutely, absolutely. But we trust each other. He'll call me or I'll call him and I'll say, I feel reactive to this video I saw. He'll listen, he'll be respectful. What was it that caused you to react? And we'll work through it. So it doesn't mean you never ever have these historical notions that run back at you. But you are in charge. Nobody else.
And I can tell you that, this man's Jewish values made me like Judaism. And his Jewish values are the same values that I have, that keep us, that bring this bond between us and make it so strong.
And to that point, the presence of Jewish activism in civil rights movement, for example, cannot be overstated.
Absolutely.
The presence of Jewish So support for South Africa cannot be overstated. And I think that's something that a lot of people forget, that the Jewish community, although recently sort of the right wing has claimed Zionism as its own, for a very long time throughout history, at least since the 1950s, Jews in North America have been at the forefront of human rights movement and civil rights movement. And I think that's something that cannot be forgotten. And as a last question, because I recognize that a lot of people, when they
Amir,
come... Yes.
if you don't mind, I'd like to add that some of the best defenders of Palestinian rights in North America have been Jewish.
Absolutely.
And continue to be to this day.
Well, the notion of never again, that sort of is a crying call of sort of Jewish, most Jewish sort of, at least left-wing secular movements, is understood to be never again, not just to us, but to everyone else as well. And that's sort of, I recognize that a lot of people are here because they want to talk rather than they just want to be talked to. Yeah. So as my last question, Canada is situated rather well. At least sort of historically, at least until recently, Canada has been known to be the peacekeeper in the world. I know you sort of talk about justice. The way I define peace is not lack of violence, but presence of justice. That's sort of in my vision whenever I say peace. Yeah, what do you think the role of us as Canadians? Now, I recognize that a lot of us identify ourselves as hyphenated Canadians.
Right.
But what is the role of us as Canadians? What are the things that Canada can do to not just in a hypothetical sense overcome this tribalism, but to actually make real differences in everyday life of both the sort of Palestinians and the Israelis, both in the land itself and in Canada more specifically?
Sure. So I'm going to start by just going back a little bit, and then I'll come back to this. I think it's really important point to recognize that this notion that Jews have always been very strong standard bearers for human rights is part of why much of my community is in pain right now. So I just want to be able to relate that, because the feeling for many is that the rise in Palestinian positive language and protest, the upsets over Gaza, et cetera, by some of my community, even the majority, are read as, we've always been defenders, but you're not defending us now. We had this tragedy on October 7th, we had an existential threat to us, and you're not defending us. I'm not saying this is logical or right. I'm helping you to understand that this is very real for many Jews. The other part is that we need to understand that we are complicit in what Canada does because we elect our governments. And Canada, the US, really all Western governments have generally propped up Zionism and the Israeli military. So if we are going to be genuine about what our role is here, that means to speak up. There has been some movement in Canada lately, which I think are positive signs. Not without pushback, but I think there are some positive signs. So if you, for example, petition the Canadian government to, as they have done on some limited basis already, not sell arms to Israel, you're not, though you might be told that you're throwing me and my tribe under the bus, you're not. You're saying that this is perpetuating a conflict that's dangerous for both Jews and Palestinians. So we have a role in the West. The US has the largest role. I mean, to be perfectly frank, if the US policy towards Israel changed, things over there would change in days. There are many reasons why the US doesn't, largely geopolitical, but other reasons as well. So I want you to feel, as people who live in Canada, that you have not only a role, but a duty to speak out. Because your government is theoretically representing your voice. So if they're not representing your voice, Your job is to let them know that.
Canada was, created as a binational state between French and the British. And it can really advocate for a binational state in historic Palestine. It can present itself as a model for coexistence. The French and the British in Europe fought each other for centuries, and they brought their wars here and other places in the world. But in the end, now they're allies, and in Canada, we're one country with two nations. I would argue more than two nations. Of course, there are the First Nations. But, it's a functioning binational state with all the compromises it takes. And to me, the only just solution for Palestinians and Jews in the land of Israel, Palestine, is to share the land equally and not partition the land, share the land, all of the land. That's both of them having access to all of the land with equal rights and for everyone in it. It shouldn't be hard for Canada to champion such a stand because of our own history. But of course, you wouldn't hear any peep of that in the corridors of Parliament Hill because of political considerations and our biases towards Israel because it's an ally. We see it as a Western country. We still don't see Arabs, brown Arabs and Muslims as like us. We see Israelis are like us, more or less. Of course, we're driven by all kinds of interests that may not support us going forward with that kind of approach. But more and more people are beginning to advocate for one democratic state for all in the land of Palestine. And while it's difficult to see that happening, right now, and it may take a generation or two, but I really believe it's the only just solution.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So to be clear, we're not done. It's your turn.
So this is a question time for those of you who are joining us online. Our fearless Dean is monitoring the chat, and he'll pass on the questions as time goes on. But let's start. I don't really want to get you guys to get off your seat and line up to ask questions. I feel like that's a bit too academic. So just put up your hands, and I'll do my best to get to you. If you feel like I don't see you, kind of wave a bit. I promise I'll get to you. I'm good at keeping a track. So go ahead. Yes.
You said that if the U.S. changed its policy on Israel, we would see changes immediately. In the past, Israel has gone without any Western support. And their military spending was something high double digits of their GDP. And that was because it was seen as an existential thing. So how would Biden's actions affect Israeli policy?
Sure. Well, we don't have to go into the deep history, but basically Israel has been largely reliant on outside influences, starting in the 67 war and increasing in the 73 war and forward. So currently the U.S. gives about $40 billion in military aid to Israel every year. So yes, you were asking, could they function without that? Perhaps. The key part about Western support is most of it is reputational. Israel needs the West to support it in order to maintain the things that it does to further the occupation, to continue doing the things that it does to dominate Palestinians. If it loses that reputational status, the whole sort of cake starts to crumble. Practically speaking, the biggest thing the US could do is to tie any form of military aid to actions that Israel has to do to relieve suffering of Palestinians. If that happened, things would begin to change. It's not that they wouldn't try to find other means, but if you've studied it at some depth, you know that Israel and the US are very, 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 very dominant allies. And it's largely because of maintaining that sort of central source in the middle of, between the Gulf states and Iran, controlling oil. Surprise, surprise, money dominates most foreign policy. So I do think it would have a profound effect. Raj always said this before, you can't know. So do I know? Do we know? Is there anything you want to add?
Amir.
No, I'm good. Let's move.
Oh,
We can do that.
Oh.
If you would like to.
okay, sure.
How about if we ask the...
How about a tech person? You're a smart man. I'm not touching it.
That's it.
Well, that's way better.
McMaster
Oh,
graduates.
he doesn't have to look at me anymore.
Gee, I see enough of you every day.
Okay, next question.
Thanks. Thank you so much. I mean, should I wait? Okay, I'll wait.
I can't hear the question.
Oh. Thanks, Allison. Thank you so much for being here and sharing that dialogue, your comradeship, your friendship, the way that you communicate across these philosophical, historical, political, and cultural, divides is just wonderful, and I think a tremendous model of peaceful communication. And we certainly need more of that in the world, given how polarized the world has become. And with that, I'm sort of looking for a resource of hope, given all of the atrocity and the violence and the hatred and the polarization. Your friendship suggests there's another way. And out of this conflict, do you imagine more of this will occur, where more dialogue across communities will happen? And I'm just wondering if you're seeing even a quantitative increase of more people having these discussions as a result of this conflict. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, absolutely. Did you want to start, Raja? But the answer is absolutely.
Yeah, the last part of the question I didn't get, but I think I got the gist of it, and yes, we've seen in recent months a growing and energized population of people here in North America, but also in Israel, Palestine, that are fed up with the status quo. They look at what's happening and they say this can't go on. The last couple of days we hosted a group called Standing Together from Israel, made up of Arab and Jewish citizens of Israel who are, who advocate for equal rights for all, who advocate for ending the occupation, ending the war on Gaza, of course, freeing the hostages. I think there's renewed energy in those circles because of what happened and the ugliness of what happened and continues to happen. It's not over yet.
Yeah,
and what gives me a lot of hope is all these young, Jews in here in North America and in the States in particular, who have been advocating for a ceasefire and for Palestinian rights, who are not as encumbered by trauma as their parents were, and they want they are more driven by the Jewish values of liberalism, then they are driven by, trauma and fear. So there is hope, my friends. There's definitely hope.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. The only thing I'll add is there actually has been people doing this work for a long time. You don't hear about it. There's amazing groups in Israel-Palestine. One is called the Grieving Parents Circle. They are parents that have both lost children to the conflict, and because of the urgency that they experience of that loss, they work together every day to create conversation, dialogue, political change. You usually, it's a lot sexier to hear about people being angry at each other, right? There's been people working together, many, many NGOs that work on this and have been for years. I think the main challenge is two things. Always the body politic is the last to catch up. And two, that the power of the media representations of pain on our screens every night really does a lot to polarize us and how we talk to each other on social media or don't talk, right? We get information that really shows us what we already think, and then we get more of it and more of it and more of it. So it's really going against the flow right now to say, even to start with, a simple statement. 3 words. I don't know. I said that to Raja probably 5,000 times in the last 5 years. I don't know.
That's a very hard thing for us to say. I don't know.
Practice. It becomes much easier.
Over there, then we'll go over here. And then we'll go.
It's wonderful that we're having this conversation here. And I commend you for that. And really, it's the start of the road to peace. But I want you to reflect, both of you, on the role that Hamas plays in all of this. And not just Hamas, but there are other groups who want to set up Islamic states and who can't have these types of conversations. And I'm sure there are Israeli counterparts. But can you reflect on the role of Hamas?
That's all yours, my
I can
friend.
promise you that there will never be an Islamic
Sorry, can't hear
state.
you.
I can promise you there will never be an Islamic state in Palestine. Palestine was never and will never be that kind of society. It's always been a pluralistic, diverse, a community of the world where people from all over the world will come for pilgrimage in Palestine. Christians, Muslims, Jews, and often settle there. My own, grandfather traces roots to Croatia. My grandmother was white and blue-eyed. Palestine always had the world in it, and the Hamas being Islamist does not equate it with ISIS wanting to establish Islamic caliphates and things like that. Hamas essentially is a nationalist resistance movement. We all dislike their methods, their violence, their radicalism. But their main intention is not to establish an Islamic state.
This is a really, really tough one, right? This is a flashpoint of the conversation. So, if you talk about starving civilians and the bombing of civilian targets, there's a group that will immediately say, yeah, but what about Hamas? And both of these things matter. Yeah. The key part is to understand that you can understand and respect resistance and still say that this certain actions are wrong. We said from day one, the actions of October 7th were a war crime. And the current bombing and starvation is also a war crime. You don't have to mince your words. You can be clear and strong. I do think it's important, to your question, is to see Hamas more of a, as a symptom rather than the disease. They are very bad to Palestinians. They are very bad for Jews. They are destructive to peace. And they are, for Palestinians, the only resistance movement pushing back against their oppression. It's hard to even express to us, sitting here in this beautiful hall, what life in Gaza was like before October 7th. Somebody asked us weeks ago, why do Palestinians teach their children to hate Jews? You know, really accusatory question. But the beautiful answer, the learning answer, is what Raja gave. And that is that living in Gaza teaches Palestinians to hate. We need to reframe our perspectives. We need to remove the need for resistance and talk about that way more than talk about the resistance itself. It's easy to condemn what Hamas did on October 7th. It was horrible and barbaric on every standard. And it didn't happen by itself. It is a part of a much larger narrative. I think that it's easy for us in the West to forget that because we get sort of the CNN version of the conflict. There's a lot more to it.
Well, it's always this desire to kind of find the good guy and the bad guy,
Right.
To sort of say, well, we have to have identifiable right and wrong, when world is much more complex than just black and white.
It's gray.
Thank you. I think that was a very beautiful answer. I wanted to ask you, as we know there's a lot of, I guess, propaganda and disinformation, how do you recommend someone, obviously to get to the point where you're at, where you, I guess, have a clear view of events? It's hard to get there when you have media that's telling you Israel is the most moral army in the world and propaganda as such. So where do you recommend us getting our sources of information so we can, I guess, acquire such a mutual understanding? Yeah.
From as many sources as possible. Diversify your sources of information. In this day and age, you know, information is available everywhere, which is also, of course, good and bad, because a lot of disinformation goes in there. I find the best information these days is from, you know, regular folks in Gaza with their phones going around, taping, recording what's happening around. That, you know, tells you a lot about the picture of what's going on.
Yes, absolutely. There is good news in the social media age, that in many ways news is being democratized. And that is a very good thing, because the main proper first source, primary source for the academic, you know, is a cell phone.
Over there, then we'll come back. Somebody has the mic. Go for it.
My question is, what did you mean by tribal differences and the tribal lines? And when, I think it was Amir, you said the tribal lines were drawn by imperialist powers. What did you mean by that notion?
Right. I'm sorry, who are you asking the question to Raja?
To all of you guys.
Okay.
I just don't know what you mean by tribal lines and
Sure.
tribal influences.
Sure.
That's yours, Jeff.
That's mine. Okay. So you've probably heard of something called zero-sum game. Are you familiar with that? So tribalism, I'll explain it. So zero-sum game is there's only one way to solve a problem. Either I win or you win. Tribal lines says my tribe has the advantage or your tribe has the advantage. It says that there is no mutual cooperative space that we can work together. I'm just kind of looking at, excuse me, is that helping? So it's divisions, it's false divisions that are created around narratives that are siloed, that are not multi-directional. What we need to do is tell stories through each other, not to each other. And did you want to add something on what you meant about tribal influences? No, he couldn't hear me. It's okay.
No, he thinks you're talking to the...
No, I was talking to you. I was talking to
Raja.
Raja. He can't see me.
Yeah.
Right, they took our communications away. Raja, would you like to answer the second part of the question?
I think that was directed at Amir.
Okay.
I'm not responsible for what Amir says.
No, I think that was a perfect, like what I was trying to point out was how the British imperialist mechanism often was to create tribal divisions, put the minority in charge against the majority, so now the minority requires the British system to support it and becomes dependent on it. Sorry, that's sort of what I meant by it. I was summarizing this
that's beautiful. I think what can help is, I think we're talking about tribalism in two different ways. So I think we're talking about tribes as they exist, organically or ethnically in a space that are then pitted against each other. We're talking about us here, our group, our collective memory, what glues us together as people, as Jews, as Palestinians, as white, as black, as liberals, as conservatives. So those labels that narrow our perspective and make it, we're either us, or them. And just to kind of add, we often talk about, academically, about othering, the other. The other does not exist. The other is created. Raja's not my other, because I haven't othered him. I'm not his other, because he hasn't othered me. And I think that's something we really forget. We think that othering is kind of this thing that's just in the air. No, it doesn't exist. We created it.
I know someone behind the, yes. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
My question...
Go ahead, Professor.
Out me, thank you. My question goes to the beauty of the poem, the poem about the concentric circles, and draw a larger circle. And I'm thinking that, especially in an age of misinformation, it was easy for you because both of you were in the inner circle where you cared 100% about what was right, not who was right. So you had a space you could hold that conversation. There are people out there who are on the other side of the continuum, who care 0% about what is right and 100% about who is right. And when and to support that, they get into misinformation. So to draw that larger circle, to draw them in, what is the medium that you draw that circle with?
Curiosity. Inspire curiosity. I mean, I want to be clear as the cognitive social psychologist guy here. Our brain loves a simple story. It is absolutely junk food for the brain. It's French fries and chocolate cake. It doesn't require contest. It doesn't require struggle. It's easy. So what I think you're doing here, and hopefully you're all doing at a university, is you're creating contest. Truths that are blurred. Multiple perspectives. Even in younger students, I've taught a lot of history to younger students. And the soonest you resolve it for them, they lose interest. As long as there's controversy, they stay engaged. So I think the first point to your question is create spaces that develop curiosity and allow tension to be present. The problem with being right is you never learn anything. Right? It's great, but you don't expand your horizons. You don't become bigger. You don't become broader. Society's healing requires us to reach outside of our little zone of proximity, because the larger truths live outside of us.
I also want to recognize that I know it's getting very close to sunset, and there are people who
Right.
are fasting today. So I want to ask if there's anyone who wants to break a fast. First of all, Phil, welcome to Leave. Thank you for coming. I want to give the next question to if there is anyone who's sort of jonesing to ask before they leave. If not, we'll carry on with the sort of.
I'd like to add a couple of words to that last question.
So is there anyone who's going to break their fast that has a question that they want to ask? That's what they're waiting for? If not, we can carry on with sort of the normal.
And we do have some books here if people are interested in
Yes.
purchasing a book.
I remember being asked by friends in my early days of dialogue with Zionists as to why are you doing it? What's the point? And I said, I want to understand them. I want to know where they're coming from. And I said, don't you think we need to understand them? And I got a look back that said, why would we want to understand them? They're the enemy.
Maybe we should wrap it up soon. It feels like okay.
So, you can choose to think of the other as the enemy, or you can choose to engage and try to understand them and find common ground in the hope that, instead of enmity, there becomes one day friendship.
So we have two more questions and then we'll wrap it up. But there is a book signing. If you guys want to get the book, we have a bunch of copies here. So please just stick around. But there are two more questions and then we'll finish it over there, then in the corner over there. Three more.
My question is for Jeff. You talked a lot about trying to let go of our tribal notions and empathizing with the other group. And in doing so, you expressed a lot of views that are empathetic to the Palestinian movement. And I really have to applaud you for that. I guess I'm curious to know, as someone who's a member of the Jewish community, have you experienced any negative feedback or pushback or anything like that?
None at all. Never. Well, of course, but it's worth it, because right is right. And yes, of course, I personally, this isn't an easy path to follow, because I'm swimming against the mainstream of my community. But I have lots of support. There's lots of other Jews who are doing similar things. They're not going to write on our gravestone, well, he was really loyal. That doesn't make a big difference. Swimming upstream makes a much bigger difference. But thank you for your question.
Over there.
You don't have to go to the gym tonight.
I think we should give a little round of applause for Allison for.
So my question is to everyone. So many Canadians and many people around the world has indulged into acts of civil disobedience in order to obtain justice. I was wondering if that's an ethical as well as an effective avenue in order to receive justice.
You can't see me. Raja, did you want to say something about that?
I don't have any thoughts on that. I haven't given that thought, to be honest.
Okay. Yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. As I said earlier, it doesn't come free. Like, if you receive consequences for that civil disobedience, you have to live with them. But yes, I think all change movements included civil disobedience and always will.
Yeah, we're trying to save Allison the extra exertion. So I wanted to thank you both very much. and thank Amir as well for this excellent job of moderating. I've been looking online and in terms of our online audience, and there aren't too many questions, but there are more statements of support. I thought I would read very quickly just a couple. Allison, not that Allison, but she might concur. Allison writes that this discussion gives me hope that more people can learn and discuss and discover both sides. For the authors to have been able to accept and present their community's shared trauma as just that, shared, is very refreshing. And I hope we can all move forward with love in our hearts, practicing peace and caring for everyone. And then another statement is from Christina, who writes, my grandfather was from Ramallah in the West Bank. He would talk about how Christian, Muslim, and Jewish people in Ramallah would get along, and they were friends and supported each other. We can trace our family tree as Christian Palestinians to the 1500s at least. I love seeing the friendship between both of you as it reflects my grandfather's view and how he taught us. And so I think those are very nice notes to leave on. I realize how difficult a discussion as this can be for everyone. The trauma is shared outside the tribes as well, right? But of course, it's not as intense, and no one's claiming it is. But it really is, I think, a shared trauma that we all need to think about, reflect on. I'm very glad we had the opportunity to do so at a university setting. Universities should be places where calm discourse takes place. Right? And I think we've proven tonight that that can happen. So I'm very proud of everyone here. But I'm especially grateful to our speakers for having the courage to continue to do this. And just marvelous. Thank you very much. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. And as I said, there are books up here, and Jeff, I'm sure, is happy to sign them for you.